This is Al Jazeera.
And live from Studio 14 here at Al Jazeera headquarters in Doha, I'm Darina Bougaida. Welcome to the News Grid. Ignoring his campaign promise to end America's longest war, President Donald Trump touts his new strategy for Afghanistan. The plan is short on details, but he says that's a tactical decision. We'll have reaction to the way forward. Efforts to end the Saudi-led blockade against Qatar continue in the region, but there is a push to discredit Doha. We'll tell you about the misinformation being spread on the internet and the airwaves. And we'll examine why a high court ruling on divorce for Muslims in India is causing a stir. There are some critics who say the Supreme Court decision isn't about matrimony at all.
While others say it's a victory for Muslim women. I'm Andrew Chappelle. We want to hear what you think of the ruling in India. So share your questions and comments throughout the show using the hashtag AJNewsGrid.
Here with the News Grid, we're live on air. We're streaming online through YouTube, Facebook Live, and at aljazeera.com. He once described it as a complete waste and says his original instinct was to pull out of Afghanistan. But the U.S. president has now done a U-turn on America's longest war. Donald Trump has not fully revealed his new strategy, but on Monday, he said he'll expand the campaign there without revealing how many more U.S. troops might be required. So he's pledged to, quote, fight to win in Afghanistan, and has also had tough words for Pakistan, accusing it of receiving billions of dollars from the U.S., but not doing enough to fight terrorism. And Trump wants India to play a larger role in promoting economic development in Afghanistan, something Pakistan is firmly opposed to. We'll cross over to our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, who has more for us on this story. So what is it that makes this strategy, Kimberly, different than anything the U.S. has previously done in Afghanistan?
Well, judging from the reaction here in Washington, certainly the standout is the tough stance on Pakistan. Long been in Washington, the feeling it's been is that it's the elephant in the room, acknowledging that there was a feeling in Washington that you really couldn't address security in Afghanistan without holding Pakistan accountable for generally the feeling that it is providing a safe haven for radical groups. So this is, of course, significant. We saw that this perhaps was even coming when we saw the Secretary of Defense speaking before Congress in July, in fact, signaling that funds would be withheld from Pakistan until it could verify, in fact, that there had been some accountability in terms of putting pressure on the Haqqani network, which, of course, the United States believes is closely linked to the Taliban in Afghanistan. But the other signal, too, that there is something different here in this strategy, you touched on at the start of the show, and that is what many feel is the lack of accountability in terms of details on what is happening with the Afghan strategy moving forward.
A core pillar of our new strategy is a shift from a time-based approach to one based on conditions. I've said it many times, how counterproductive it is for the United States to announce in advance the dates we intend to begin or end military options. We will not talk about numbers of troops or our plans for further military activities. Conditions on the ground, not arbitrary timetables, will guide our strategy from now on. America's enemies must never know our plans or believe they can wait us out. I will not say when we are going to attack, but attack we will.
What kind of reaction, Kimberly, is this strategy getting in Washington?
Well, Republicans, not surprisingly, seem to be on board with this, calling it generally long overdue. But what you heard Donald Trump say there just a few moments ago, that there'll no longer be these details that will be forthcoming, that's very problematic to the president's critics, particularly Democrats, who say what's lacking is accountability, which is critical when you're talking about soldiers' lives and when you're talking about a prolonged conflict now and the price tag for it. Ultimately, it's Congress that has to pay for this and foot the bill. So the fact that the president is saying saying that he will no longer be making a lot of this widely known is certainly not going to sit well with the Democrats on Capitol Hill. And so certainly watch for them to be pressing for more details in the weeks and months to come, because not only are they concerned about that, but as you pointed out as well, the concern is, too, that Donald Trump has broken a major campaign promise. He certainly telegraphed before the election that he would be signaling to get out of Afghanistan. And, of course, what we've heard from the president now is a complete reversal of that.
Okay, Kimberly Halka giving us the update from Washington. Thank you. So the Taliban has issued its own statement in response to the Trump strategy. So here's a portion of that statement. Independence of Afghanistan is our responsibility to our religion and our country. We will continue to fight for this until the last drop of our blood. America needed to adopt a strategy of withdrawing its troops from Afghanistan. Let's bring in Michael Semple. He's a visiting research professor at Queen's University Belfast, joining us from the Northern Ireland capital. Thanks for joining us on the News Grid. So I just read out part of the statement that the Taliban has put out. Through your research, you've written extensively on the Taliban. Just weigh in on that statement and their response. Are you surprised by what the Taliban had to say?
This is the absolutely predictable response from the Taliban. They are pretty much obliged to condemn any U.S. commitment to stay in Afghanistan.
The point of view from Russia, Mr. Semple, is that the Trump policy is actually aimed at China rather than the Taliban or Russia, and it's an attempt to rile Beijing into more action in Central Asia. Is that a fair assessment, in your opinion?
Well, the national security team that worked with President Trump to put together this strategy certainly tried to come up with a regional strategy rather than one just focused on Afghanistan. But a lot of it was about how to use the relationships in the region to finish the job in Afghanistan rather than somehow to project themselves into China. And certainly the references to some kind of boosted partnership with India will raise some questions for China. It seems that the US and China now have very different perspectives on Pakistan and Pakistan's role. However, there still is some common ground between China, Russia and the US on this. All of them, I think, would like to see a stable Afghanistan which is not controlled by jihadi groups, whether the Taliban or Al-Qaeda. Let's
just zone in on Russia for a moment. What is the Russian strategy in Afghanistan right now in 2017?
Well, the Russians have adopted a position over the past couple of years saying that whereas that they're in favor of a long-term withdrawal of the US military from the region, they are prepared to tolerate and somewhat cooperate with a temporary presence of the US troops to help restore security in Afghanistan. So to some extent, they have been cooperative with the US and with the government in Kabul. But we've seen over the past couple of years public hints from Russia saying that they're starting some dealings with the Taliban because of a common threat of Islamic State. And we've seen condemnation from the US, reports from some of their generals saying that they detect covert Russian assistance going to the Taliban. That's not strategic assistance. It's not on the level that it's going to change the balance in the conflict, but it does suggest that the Russians are trying to expand their influence in the region, so that they want to establish direct relations with some of the Afghan actors, Taliban, non-Taliban, as well as the Afghan government, which you can say is they're hedging. They're hedging against the possibility.
Can you respond to a viewer question? Mr. Semple, Fabrizio sending us a comment on Facebook, a question rather, saying, why does every single U.S. president fail to understand that the army is not the solution to the Afghan situation?
Well, I think that's a wonderful question. And I suspect that many of the people who were involved in the discussions, in Camp David and in the White House running up to this, I suspect that many of the insiders made the same point. And there are actually some markers there in this strategy which leave way for diplomacy. Because I suspect if you asked the clever US generals, they would say, of course they know that the military can buy time, but it can't actually solve the problem. Right. So whether this delivers or not will depend on how serious they are in political action rather than just depending on the military.
Got it. Michael Semple, we thank you for speaking to us from Belfast. We'll bring in Andrew Chappell. He's across the online reaction to this story.
Well, this is certainly a big topic of discussion online in the United States, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And with U.S. President Trump, there always seems to be an old tweet or two, or several in this case, to dig up. In 2013 in particular, President Trump, or candidate Trump at the time, Mr. Trump rather, said, quote, "Very stupid leaders shouldn't sign a deal that keeps us in Afghanistan through 2024 with all costs by the USA." Now, while a lot of people are asking for more information about potential troop numbers on Twitter, some Trump supporters are asking for America to trust their commander-in-chief.
I think that the president has to clean up some things that the past administration left undone in Afghanistan. I believe he knows some things that we don't know, and that's why he's having to make this decision. I trust him and his advisors, the generals. So I have to say, yes, I am in support of this move that he's making in Afghanistan.
Now, in Afghanistan, the conversation is largely positive. You've got government spokesmen like Sadiq Siddiqui here saying that Afghanistan will prosper into peace and harmony, and it won't become a place for terrorists. The same goes for others like Sadia here, who has welcomed the president's strategy, while many other people online see no strategy at all. Hassan here says we support an Afghan-led peace process. Now, we also got this video from Farza, who's an Afghan student in Malaysia.
The only way we can defeat terrorism in Afghanistan is to put more pressure on countries such as Russia, Iran, and Pakistan that are supporting and funding terrorism in Afghanistan. As the US president announced, by implementing this new strategy, we will see a peaceful Afghanistan very soon.
Now, there's been lots of negative reaction to Trump's comments from Pakistan. There's a hashtag Pakistan rejects Trump, which soon got thousands of shares there. And Shakil here says, he says Washington should feel ashamed. Quote, "We are not American slaves as a nation, but our corrupt leaders may be." And this is what one of our viewers from Pakistan had to say.
This is not our future for Pakistan. This is not a peaceful system. And because we are lost 70,000 people in Pakistan, including soldiers and civilians, how we are accept this fake policy, which is very dangerous for Pakistan.
Thanks for your input, Ali. We also want to hear from you, so get in touch with us. You can tweet me directly. I'm at Andrew Chappelle, or just use the hashtag AJNewsGrid.
And you can also keep up with the timeline of the U.S. intervention in Afghanistan on our website. Our online team has broken down the main developments of the 16-year conflict, starting from the 2001 invasion to Trump's latest strategy announcement. Many viewers watching the NewsGrid from the U.S., from Pakistan, as well as Afghanistan, sending in many questions and comments, in fact, to our online platform. So Eric on Facebook asking, what is the metric for quote unquote winning 18 years, and what has America to show for Afghanistan? And also via WhatsApp, one viewer saying there is no future for USA troops in Afghanistan because Afghan land has become the land of proxy war between two opponents. Those are Russia and America. And we have Nathan from Uganda also sending us a comment via WhatsApp saying Trump thought things were easy, but he's realized how hard they are. That's why he's reversed his promise. So you can also send in your comments and your questions. You can do so via Twitter, via Facebook at facebook.com/AJNewsGrid. And you can send us a WhatsApp on +974 50 111 149. And just a reminder to always use the hashtag AJNewsGrid. So the U.S. has long accused Pakistan of not doing enough efforts to stabilize Afghanistan. And while addressing military troops at Fort Myer in the U.S. state of Virginia, Trump said this on Pakistan. He said that it's become a safe haven for terrorist groups. Listen.
Pakistan has also sheltered the same organizations that try every single day to kill our people. We have been paying Pakistan billions and billions of dollars. At the same time, they are housing the very terrorists that we are fighting. But that will have to change, and that will change immediately. No partnership can survive a country's harboring of militants and terrorists who target U.S. service members and officials. It is time for Pakistan to demonstrate its commitment to civilization, order, and to peace.
Well, one analyst says the U.S. is adopting a simplistic view of the situation in Afghanistan and Pakistan's role in that.
I think the Pakistan can facilitate these talks between Kabul and between Taliban. So this is, if they need some Pakistan help, whether this is the war strategy or the negotiation, Pakistan cannot be ignored. And if they think the one nation can do it only while threatening them and pressurizing them, I think this is not going to be work.
Now, fighters on both sides of the Pakistani-Afghan border have for years been attacking supplies bound for NATO forces in Afghanistan. NATO supplies are routinely targeted as they move through the Khyber Pass, which has been closed down several times. The 32-kilometer route starts off in Pakistan. As you can see, it cuts through the Hindu Kush Mountains and across the border into Afghanistan. Kamal Haidar joining us from Islamabad. Kamal, Mohamad on Facebook sending in this comment to NewsGrid saying Pakistan has no role to play. Pakistan played its role with cleaning out the mess of the U.S. And we heard Donald Trump come down pretty hard on Pakistan in his speech outlining the strategy on Afghanistan. Is Pakistan surprised by anything Trump had to say?
Everybody here was expecting a tougher policy from the US president, so it doesn't come as a surprise. There is a perception here that when allies start blaming each other and scapegoating each other, it's the first signal of defeat. The Americans have failed to achieve their objectives. They want Pakistan to do more. They want other countries to do more, but has not been able to do enough, despite pumping in tens of billions of dollars trying to rebuild the Afghan army, and now saying that they will not go for a very large number of troops, but will continue to target those that they say that are the terrorists. On the Pakistani side, the signals that are coming here are a bit different, because today the Pakistani foreign minister, the new foreign minister, Khwaja Asif, met with the US ambassador, who paid a courtesy call, and they said that there would be further discussions between the Pakistanis when the Pakistani foreign minister goes to Washington to meet the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. So it's going to be important to see what Trump says and what transpires in those talks. But the perception here is that Pakistan is not in a weak position. Pakistan has strong allies. Beijing has come out squarely in favor of Pakistan, saying that they continue to support the Pakistani efforts. Tens of billions of dollars have been promised by the Chinese. So Pakistan is not isolated. It wants to continue its bilateral relationship with the United States, but is also alarmed with the growing partnership between New Delhi and Washington. So all those things, of course, will be foremost on the minds of Pakistanis. However, nobody expects any miracles in Afghanistan, because if 100,000 or over 100,000 troops could not do anything, then just a mere few thousand is not going to change the situation on the battlefield.
Okay, got it. Kamal Haidar, thank you for that update from Islamabad. Moving on to the Gulf diplomatic crisis, and Senegal is sending its ambassador back to Doha to restore diplomatic relations. Meanwhile, Qatar has been at the receiving end of several false publications and media stories. On Monday, Dubai TV aired a false report of protests in Qatar, which has now been circulating online, and that report claimed that there had been a curfew after anti-government protests in Doha. It also falsely reported that troops, including those from Turkey, used tear gas against protesters. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt all imposed an embargo on Qatar in early June, accusing it of supporting terrorism, a charge the Qatari government has strongly denied. Meanwhile, Julian Assange has slammed UAE-based Al Arabiya channel for publishing what he calls absurd fabrications against Qatar. The WikiLeaks founder says the Saudi-owned network quoted him as saying he has 7 cables about Qatar and only 5 were published after Qatar negotiated with the website's administration that requested huge sums of money. Let's talk about all of this with Mohamad Elmasry. He's an associate professor of media and cultural studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. He's joining us, however, from Minneapolis. Thanks for being with us. So, look, we know that fake news is not new, and it was a big part of what had initially sparked the Gulf crisis with the Qatar news agency being hacked in the beginning. But interestingly now, what we have is Julian Assange weighing in on this story, on fake news that's appearing in some media outlets. What do you make of his comments?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think most of the people that are in the GCC area and that are following it closely have probably already taken sides. They've either taken the Qatari side or they've taken the side of the Saudi-led alliance. So it's probably not going to have a major impact in the region. However, Assange has a pretty large voice. He has more than 300,000 followers on Twitter. And his tweet has been retweeted many, many times. And so it could have an impact in the sphere of international public opinion. One of the things that I think is interesting is I mentioned those retweets. A lot of the people retweeting Assange right now are people that are in the GCC and specifically in Qatar who are sympathetic to Qatar and the Qatari government, sort of retweeting this as to emphasize that there are those outside of Qatar who also see the Saudi-led alliance as being oppressive and wrong.
But how risky is all of this to their credibility, to media organizations' credibility when they put out stories like this that are clearly untrue and just simply fabricated?
Well, credibility, I don't know how interested they are in credibility, quite frankly. I mean, the United Arab Emirates has, long ago lost credibility in journalistic circles and in media scholar circles. There have been numerous false reports. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt in particular have been carrying out a very intense campaign against Qatar, really going back several years, dating back to the early days of the Arab Spring. All of it has to do, of course, with Qatar's position on the pro-democracy movements in the Arab region, which Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt viewed as existential threats to their stability. And as part of that campaign, they've published and broadcast numerous false reports, numerous reports that have used exaggeration and hyperbole, characterized by lots of inaccuracies, as an attempt to try and demonize Qatar. I think it's important, in part because Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that this all speaks to sort of the bigger picture of this issue of fake news that, in fact, you see everywhere, not only right now in the GCC. So who's responsible ultimately for the stopping of this misflow of information? Would it be the journalists themselves, or would it be the audience? Who needs to be held responsible?
Well, I think we have to sort of, first of all, define our terms, right? I mean, do we mean fake news the way that President Donald Trump means it, which is just news that is critical about him and his administration? Or do we mean fake news by, falsified reports, reports that level baseless accusations? If we mean the latter, then I think the responsibility is twofold. I think, first of all, news organizations have a basic responsibility, and also people who operate social media websites, because a lot of the fake news reports originate on social media sites. But I think there's also a responsibility on the news audience, that we have to have, frankly, more critical thinking ability. We have to be able to examine news articles more critically. We have to have a higher sense of sort of press or news literacy, so that we can differentiate between accurate reports and inaccurate reports. But what we know from media scholarship is that people are susceptible to fake news reports. There was just a study published within the last few months focusing on the United States, but people's opinions can and do change on the basis of these kinds of reports. And we also know that people selectively expose themselves to information and news that conforms to their preconceived notions, their attitudes and beliefs. And so you might see a fake news report and think it's preposterous and absurd, but for someone else, it's a confirmation of their opinion.
Right. Okay, Mohamad Elmasry, we'll leave it there. We thank you for speaking to us from Minneapolis. Now, our program, The Listening Post, is in fact a weekly media critique and analysis show. That's where the team tracks the state of journalism and media. So you can check out an interactive map on their page to see some of the recent reports from different parts of the world. You'll find it under The Listening Post, and that is under shows on Al-Jazeera.com. Do get in touch with us as well. Send in your comments to our online platforms. We're on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ English. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/AJ Newsgrid. Our WhatsApp number is +974 50 149. And just use the hashtag AJ Newsgrid so we can see your comments as well as your questions. If you're watching us on Facebook, what you'll see in a moment is you'll take a look at a centuries-old custom of Taiwan's Amis tribe, which brings couples together. That's on Facebook. And also coming up on the news grid after the break, a difficult breakup. India's Supreme Court rules that a controversial Muslim divorce law violates the Constitution. Details in just a moment.
的过年很像，对，然后就是大家聚在一起，然后最重要就是今天这个节日，情人之夜，对，所以对我们意义其实还蛮重大，也不是说一定要挑选到某一个对象，只是说我们喜欢大家聚在一起的感觉。
Take a look at what's trending right now on our website. The top story, the world reacts to Trump's new strategy on the Afghan war, which we've been covering quite extensively here on the News Grid. And number 2, Missouri inmate faces execution despite DNA evidence. That's a story we're covering you out of the United States, where Marcellus Williams is due to be executed despite new DNA evidence supporting his claim to innocence. Read more about that on Al-Jazeera.com. And in third and fourth spot, India's Supreme Court bans Muslim divorce law, which is the story that we are doing next for you right here on the News Grid. So here it is. The Indian Supreme Court has ruled that verbal divorce by Muslims is unconstitutional. The so-called triple talaq practice is where a husband says to his wife, "I divorce you 3 times," and ends a marriage. That ruling is seen as a victory for some Muslim women who've been left destitute by the practice. But critics say the government has no right to interfere in religious matters, and it's part of a crackdown on the minority Muslim community in India. So this has been a big topic of conversation in India for quite a long time. It was one of the top trending stories there today on Twitter. And we also do have viewers watching us, in fact, from India. Andrew, and what have you been seeing?
Well, before today, if you were a Muslim man in India, you could divorce your wife just by uttering one word 3 times. So this video clip here is one of the most popular posts of the day on Twitter. It appears to show a man who divorces his wife by triple talaq because she could not conceive a son. Now, that particular clip was shared by a supporter of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The Prime Minister told his 33 million followers after the ruling that this is a powerful measure for women's empowerment. His government backed the petitioners in the case, and the ruling Hindu-dominated BJP party has long pushed for a uniform civil code that governs all Indians. Now, many commentators have highlighted a number of extreme cases where triple talaq could be announced through email, SMS, or WhatsApp, even from overseas, and they use those cases to show how men were misusing it. Now, these cases of electronic instant divorce are very, very rare, and triple talaq is only practiced by some of India's Muslim community, but India has the 3rd largest Muslim population in the world, around 172 million, so it still potentially impacts a lot of women. Now, more than 20 countries have already banned this practice, some of them a century ago. One of the reasons it's taken so long for the issue to be debated in India is that no one took the matter to court to say that it was affecting their fundamental rights. Not until she came along.
I want to say that this shouldn't become a political issue. Political parties should consider the condition of Muslim women in the society. This judgment should be accepted and the new law should be enacted.
Now, Shayara Bano's husband divorced her in a letter in 2015, and he took away their 2 children. She then filed a petition with India's Supreme Court last year. Many activists and journalists, many people online are adding to Bano's call for more action, and they include Rajat Sharma, who's the editor-in-chief of India TV, who's calling on all political parties to join hands and bring legislation to ban triple talaq forever, while Tufail Ahmad has called this decision a historic milestone for Muslim women's rights in India. So there are several layers to this debate. That's why it's in the news and why so many people are talking about it. And while some polls show many Muslims in India disagree with instant divorce, many also disagree with the government's handling of the matter. Now, we want to hear what you think about this, so send us your comments and questions. And if you're watching us on Facebook Live, you can share your thoughts in the comments section or just use the hashtag AJNewsGrid on Twitter.
All right, Andrew, thank you. Well, for more on this story, let's speak to Karuna Nundi. She's a constitutional and international lawyer. She's also an advocate at the Supreme Court of India, joining us via Skype from New Delhi. So I have Parijat Thakur on Twitter telling me that this furthers the cause of equal rights. I'm sure that you agree with the statement, but how much further?
This is, I think, actually an extremely important judgment, because I think Muslim women were able to cut through the sort of patriarchies that, surround all of us, and to go to the Supreme Court and ask for justice. And, I think it's a bit of a fault line between religious discrimination and gender discrimination. And I think that some of the representatives of the Muslim community that were before the court that were against the setting aside of triple talaq was saying instant triple talaq. Of course, there is the more traditional. There's the traditional triple talaq, which still stands, which has a waiting period. It has an iddat period, a period for reconciliation, reconsideration, and all of that. But this instant triple talaq, where you just say 3 words and you get divorced, is something that some members of the Muslim community were opposing.
But here's the thing, though. I have someone writing to me right now from India, Fathi, sending me a WhatsApp message saying, as Muslims, we should follow our values and principles, and the court has no right to interfere in religious matters.
Well, that's actually a misunderstanding of the legal position in this country, where the Muslim community actually asked to be governed by Shariat law. And when you say, so therefore this was codified in 1937, right? And once it's codified and once you ask to be governed by a particular law, you leave that law to be framed, to be, adjudged by the state and the courts. And our constitutional structure says that while there are practices that are essential to religion, that are to be governed by religion, the final arbiter of whether a practice is essential to religion or not is the courts. So the courts have decided the triple talaq is not essential to the Muslim religion.
It's all well and good. It's all well and good, I guess, for the judiciary to come out and say this and issue this ruling. But at the end of the day, it's going to be quite difficult to actually enforce, isn't it?
Well, but I'm not sure I agree with that, because there are, say you have a man that purports to divorce his wife, by just saying 3 words, right? And she sort of goes to court and asks for her rights, for some rights within marriage, he can't do things that are inconsistent with the marriage then. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
Because then she'd be able to go to court and say, well, we're married, and the courts should enforce, should sort of stand by her marriage.
Got it.
They would.
Karuna Nundi, we thank you very much for joining us from New Delhi, giving us your point of view on this story. Well, our colleagues on the stream took an in-depth look at this issue in one of their previous episodes, and they debate what's going on there with guests, and they get into what Muslim communities are doing to protect the rights of women. You can find that episode on Al-Jazeera.com under shows, and then you just click on the stream. Well, Israeli government lawyers have appeared at the High Court to defend a law that legalized thousands of unauthorized settler homes in the occupied West Bank. The regulation allowed Israeli authorities to confiscate privately owned Palestinian lands. The government argued that seizing the lands is legal because the owners receive compensation. The law was passed in Parliament 6 months ago, but is now being challenged in the High Court. Meanwhile, the medical director of the main Palestinian hospital in occupied East Jerusalem is calling on Israeli forces to end what he says have become increasingly aggressive tactics on hospital grounds. Dr. Bassam Abu Libne says forces are jeopardizing treatment of patients during raids in hospitals. Harry Fawcett reports.
It was one of the most searing images during days of protests in July. The body of a young man shot during the clashes hauled over a hospital wall for burial to prevent its being taken by Israeli security forces. Earlier, when Mohamad Abu Ghanam was still just alive, Israeli security forces had gone deep into Al-Maqasad hospital looking for him and had to be pushed away by medical staff trying to provide treatment. The medical director says a long-standing strategy of Israeli forces entering hospitals to arrest Palestinian suspects has recently become more aggressive.
I think this has to come to an end because this is interfering with our work. This is like harassing the staff, terrifying the patients at the hospital.
The raid took place on the most violent day of July's protests over access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, known to Jews as the Temple Mount. Israeli police told Al Jazeera that during the incident in question, investigators arrived at the hospital to obtain information from eyewitnesses, as was necessary and as is done in similar cases in other public places. Days earlier, Ala Abu Tayyeh had been at the center of another raid. He'd been shot in the thigh and needed life-saving surgery. The hospital says doctors had to prevent armed Israeli forces from entering first the operating theater and then intensive care.
When we came, the army were in front of the door. They prevented us from seeing him until the doctors allowed us in.
The hospital is clear in its intention. It wants an end to what it says is an overtly aggressive and hostile tactic. What's less clear is its power to do anything about it. For now, it's banking on pressure from the international community and non-governmental organizations.
One of them, human rights group B'Tselem, says it can do little more than investigate and publicize the raids.
To tell you that, I see a direct path between that and actual changes in the actions of the Israeli authorities, without something much bigger changing, to cut the chase without ending the occupation, we are very likely to see more such incidents.
Something the staff of Al-Maqasad Hospital, increasingly putting themselves between their patients and armed Israeli security forces, understand all too well. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, occupied East Jerusalem.
Iran says it would take just 5 days to ramp up its rate of uranium enrichment to a level needed to create a nuclear weapon. So the comments were made on state television by the head of the country's Atomic Energy Agency organization. It follows repeated threats by U.S. President Donald Trump. He said he's willing to walk away from the 2015 deal that saw economic sanctions on Iran lifted in exchange for curbing its nuclear program. Rosalind Jordan, our UN correspondent, joining us to tell us if diplomats, Rosalind, are worried at all about the Iran deal falling apart.
Well, this morning before a Security Council briefing on an unrelated issue, diplomats didn't want to talk about it, but in the past, they have told reporters that the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, is an essential tool towards making certain that not just the broader Middle East, but the entire international community is safe from the use of nuclear weapons. Certainly, the Iranians have made this threat, but the U.S. State Department recently certified, Doreen, that they are in compliance with the JCPOA, and part of that included getting rid of their stockpile of nuclear materials that could be enriched so that they could build nuclear warheads. So it's really not clear if the Iranians could actually make good on their threat, since they're supposed to not have that material, and two, because the U.S. government says that they are complying with the terms of the accord. So it seems to be that it may be just a lot of rhetoric, but it still worries diplomats here because the U.S. government has repeatedly said since Donald Trump became president that it does not believe that Iran is living up to its terms of the deal.
Okay, got it. And we understand that Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, is on her way to Vienna to the IAEA. What can we expect from that visit?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a continuation of the Trump administration's argument that it does not believe that Iran is complying with the terms of the JCPOA. She's going to be meeting with officials from the IAEA, which has the responsibility to go into Iran unannounced at the last moment to inspect facilities to make certain that Iranian officials are not trying to covertly or secretly rebuild their nuclear weapons program. She's not only going to meet with these officials and listen to what they're doing to verify what Iran is or isn't doing, but it's also going to be an opportunity for her on behalf of the Trump administration to reiterate its concerns about Iran's terms of compliance. Of course, this isn't going to lead to any major change right away, certainly in terms of what the IAEA is doing, because ultimately this isn't a deal that has a number of parties who have signed on to it, and the other parties, the EU, including Germany, China, Russia, don't want to see any changes to this plan. They believe that it is working.
Okay, Rosalind Jordan, thank you. And Rosalind is also on Twitter at RosJordan, AJE, if you have any comments or questions to her. So how close is Iran to actually making a nuclear weapon? In 2003, the International Atomic Energy Agency said that Iran had established the capacity to produce nuclear material that may one day be miniaturized so as to fit into the tip of a missile. But in 2015, President Hassan Rouhani signed a deal with 6 world powers restricting Iranian nuclear weapons program in return for easing sanctions against Tehran. Earlier this year, the independent U.S.-based group, the Arms Control Association, said Iran has no known nuclear weapons or material stockpiles to actually build weapons. Crossover to London now with more of the international stories with Jonah Hull. Hi, Jonah.
Doreen, thank you. We begin in Iraq, where airstrikes by the US-led coalition and shelling by the opposition Syrian Democratic Forces have killed 100 people in the Syrian city of Raqqa. That's over the past 48 hours. According to activists and state media, that news, most were believed to be civilians, including 19 children. US-backed Syrian opposition fighters have been trying to capture the city from ISIL since June. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces now hold more than half of Raqqa. Imtiaz Tayyab is in Beirut and sent this report.
While Syrian Democratic Forces on the ground, aided by U.S. coalition airstrikes, push deeper and deeper into Raqqa, securing now around 60% of this city, which was essentially the self-declared capital of ISIL. It's the civilians who are suffering disproportionately. Over the last 48 hours, around 100 civilians have been killed in the fighting. We understand of the 25,000 civilians who remain in this area, which is still controlled by ISIL, they're very short on food, water, medicine supplies, and the like. And those that are available are prohibitively expensive. In the words of many monitoring groups and indeed aid agencies who are trying to keep an eye on the situation on the ground in Raqqa for civilians, they say the situation extraordinarily grim. In fact, calling this the worst fighting that is going on in Syria. But again, as we've been saying, it really is civilians who have been disproportionately affected since this campaign to push ISIL out of Raqqa began on the 6th of June. We understand that that civilian death toll really just increasing week by week. But again, as we've been saying, over the last 48 hours, around 100 people killed in this fighting in Raqqa.
One of the men accused of being part of the cell behind last week's attacks in Spain has admitted to a court that they were planning a bigger attack. 4 suspects are appearing in court in Madrid. They're being questioned about the attacks in Barcelona and in Cambrils last week that killed 15 people. Police say all the suspects are now either dead or in custody after a man was shot dead on Monday. The United Nations is reporting a more than 4-fold increase in the number of children being used as human bombs by the armed group Boko Haram in northeastern Nigeria. So far this year, 83 children, most of them girls, have been used in the attacks, compared to 19 last year. That's according to the UN children's charity UNICEF. The UN estimates that 20,000 people have been killed by Boko Haram in the 8 years since it began its violent campaign in northeast Nigeria. The United States ambassador to the Philippines is calling for full accountability from President Rodrigo Duterte after a teenager was murdered by police in Manila in the leader's war on drugs. 17-year-old student Kian de los Santos was killed last week, along with more than 90 others, in a 3-day drug crackdown. Duterte has admitted to potential abuses and has ordered police to detain the officers responsible ahead of a formal investigation. Many states in India are adopting laws making it harder to slaughter cows and sell beef. Cows are sacred in India's majority Hindu religion, and say the restrictions promoted by a Hindu nationalist government are an attack on religious minorities. Bernard Smith reports from Uttar Pradesh state in northern India.
This is a sanctuary for cows, considered sacred by many Hindus. Their slaughter is illegal here in Uttar Pradesh, as it is in many parts of India. Plans by the ruling Hindu-dominated BJP party to force the rest of the country to stop eating beef are being interpreted as an attack on Muslims, India's largest minority faith.
It is not their right to consume beef. It is not their right.
Many tribal people in India used to consume human flesh. It was not their right. But ever since India has been independent, we have to compromise on some things. If we need the nation's unity, then they should compromise a little.
For now, India's Supreme Court has ordered a stay of the national law, but that's not stopped individual states making their own regulations more stringent.
This new government is doing all this because of their religious beliefs. Earlier governments never did anything to us. This slaughterhouse has been running for 112 years. We had license to run the operations here till 2014, but this government never renewed our license after that.
The community that relied on the slaughterhouse for work and food is poor and mainly Muslim. They only slaughtered buffalo here, but all livestock is included in the government's new law.
Now, the government will say that all it's trying to do is stop the unregulated animal trade, not police what people eat. But regardless of the small print, the government's order has been enough to fuel intercommunal anger and even violence.
This man was beaten to death by a group of people who suspected the cows on his truck were being taken to slaughter. Millions of people who eat beef and work in an industry that exports $4 billion worth of beef a year will be affected if the law is implemented. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Uttar Pradesh in northern India.
That's all from London, Doreen. Back to you in Doha.
Jonah, thank you. Well, our daily sports segment is coming up on the news grid, including why German football star Lukas Podolski is considering legal action against American right-wing website Breitbart. Let's find out what people are talking about in sports today with Rahul.
Doreen, thank you very much. Well, match fixing has been a huge issue facing football, not just today, but for years now. The issue has really been concentrated in Southeast Asia. For a long time, Singapore was described as the, epicentre for sports match fixing. Now, that title seems to be held by Malaysia, and that's caused big problems for the organisers of the Southeast Asian Games taking place, and currently, guess where? Kuala Lumpur, the Malaysian capital, from where Andy Richardson now reports.
Malaysian fans are hoping to witness all that's good about football at this year's Southeast Asian Games, as their team targets a first tournament title since 2011. The football competition at the last edition of the event is remembered for darker reasons. Match fixers were caught trying to bribe East Timor officials ahead of a game against Malaysia. This is a region and a country still fighting to remove the fixing from its football culture.
We don't know which officials are involved, but you know it's happening. There's a lot of talk around. There's even a list of players which are on the take and those who are not. For the lower players, this is a way to earn big. But at the same time, you've got highly paid players who are also on the take, and some of them don't get their salaries on time, and when they don't get their salaries on time, there is a higher likelihood of being pulled into match fixing.
The lowest point for Malaysia came in the mid-1990s, when more than 100 players and coaches were suspended or banned for life for their involvement, and more top-level players have been arrested this year.
One of the most infamous examples of corruption involving this country occurred in 2009, when Malaysia played and beat the much higher-rated Zimbabwe in 2 friendly internationals. Well, a subsequent investigation revealed those games had been organised by a convicted match fixer from Singapore, and the team Malaysia had played wasn't in fact the Zimbabwe national side.
We've seen arrests, we've seen indictments.
Experts in sports corruption say that while the problem is worldwide, the criminal gangs behind the fixing are often based in Southeast Asia.
It's a low-risk, high-reward venture for organized crime. And we believe that 85% of the bets placed globally are placed illegally, and that organized crime is benefiting in the billions and billions of dollars from match fixing.
Malaysia does now have a government agency tasked with taking on football corruption, and the Asian Football Confederation has this year set up a confidential phone line so that players can safely pass on sensitive information.
People are getting the message that a lot of money is involved in match fixing, that yes, we can suspend players, match officials for their involvement, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. The syndicates are still here around.
The fans at this year's games will just be hoping the matches are decided by skill on the pitch, not underhand dealings off it. Andy Richardson, Al Jazeera, Kuala Lumpur.
OK, slight change of pace now. Have a look at this picture. It first appeared on the right-wing news website Breitbart, claiming that gangs were smuggling immigrants, well, as you can see, on jet skis. But have a little closer look. Can you recognise the man on the back? That's right, it's German World Cup winning striker Lukas Podolski. In fact, this is Podolski enjoying himself during the World Cup, which Germany won in Brazil in 2014. Now, the next day, Breitbart published an updated version of the piece, but no Lukas Podolski in this picture or in any way in the text. But at the bottom of the piece, there was an apology to the players with, I think, amazing words. There is no evidence that Mr. Podolski is either a migrant gang member nor being human trafficked. We wish him well in his recently announced retirement. Quite awesome news story there from Breitbart. Well, two other celebrities to show you now. Probably know who these guys are. Samuel L. Jackson, the Hollywood star, and basketball legend Magic Johnson. Two friends out shopping, enjoying the Tuscany sunshine. Well, Italian comedian Luca Bottura decided to do a little social experiment. He reposted this picture as a meme with the caption, Boldrini's resorted in Forte del Marme, shop at Prada with our €35. Share this picture if you're outraged. And I'm afraid to say lots of people were outraged. Lots of anti-immigrant tirades from people clearly not realising who the two men in the picture really were. A tweet from Johnson himself, though, showing lots of locals did know who they were as they queued up to take photos of the pair. Well, if you've got some real news, you can get in touch with us using the hashtag AJNewsGrid or tweet me directly at RahulP_sport. I'll be back with more at 1800 GMT. But for now, back to Doreen.
Rahul, thank you very much for that. And that'll do it for this News Grid. Remember, you can keep in touch with us on social media. And we especially want to hear from you if you're in Angola, by the way, because we want to know what you think of the elections. Send in your comments using the hashtag AJNewsGrid. Keep in touch with us. All the ways to do so are right there. We'll see you back here on Wednesday.